the back, so let's get started. Okay, first breakout session in SaintCon. Who's excited? Okay, no, we're not here to do any of that enthusiastic stuff. So, just kidding. Hey, how many of you guys, this is your first time at SaintCon? Awesome, perfect. Is it really your first time, Lonnie? Nice. Okay. How many of you guys have been here more than 3 times? 5 times? How many of you guys have been here more than 10 times? Awesome. We got a couple. Great. Okay. So, my name's Ethan Dodge. I am a security analyst for a fairly large software company here in the state. However, I did just accept a new job in the Bay Area and will be relocating, but I'll be coming back for B-Sides and SaintCon for sure. So, yeah, that's who I am. My handle's ETH0 on Twitter. I'm pretty active there. You can get a hold of me there. Just quick disclaimer that anything I say in here does not reflect the views of my employer or any other organization. Okay, how many of you guys are a fan of O'Reilly books? Yeah, a few guys. So I kind of ripped off their title theme, Vagrant up and running, Docker up and running, Ansible up and running. They have a ton of new books with that naming scheme. So the name of my talk is Infosec up and running. This talk, let's talk a little bit about who this is for. These are so we got any noobs in the room? This is an endearing term, I promise. It's not mean. Okay. All of us are new to something, and the thing is, we're going to talk a little bit about this. There's so many niches within security, right? That everybody's a noob to some aspect of security. Please don't be afraid to ask any questions if I explain something and you don't understand it. I can go over again, or it's going to take longer than like a minute. Feel free to come talk to me after. I'm always willing to answer questions. Hit me up via email, Twitter, whatever. Right? Alright, how many IT guys do we have here? A lot. That's I thought the majority were going to be IT guys. Not necessarily InfoSec guys, but IT guys, right? How many of you of those IT guys are kind of been looking to get into the InfoSec space? A good number of you guys? Well, I was also one of those IT guys looking to get into the InfoSec space. I mean, well, supposedly you're the best security guy on the IT team, but really 90% of your time is still dedicated towards systems administration. At least that's how it was for me, right? And that could be kind of a tough hurdle to jump. Right? How many students do we have here that are currently attending school, or we got a couple? Do we have any high school students in the room? We got one. Okay. Well, last year we were, I don't know if there are a lot of you guys here, but last year there were a lot of high school students here at SaintCon, and that got me really excited because I wish I got into this stuff in high school. I didn't get into it until a little bit later, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? I wish I would be way ahead of the game had I gotten involved in high school. So, also here, do we have any college students here? Anybody working on, do we have any grad students here that are working on like a master's or a PhD or something? A couple? Okay. Awesome. Cool. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about education. If you guys are just getting into the InfoSec scene, you'll see that it's a somewhat controversial topic in the industry, but it is growing more and more necessary. Okay, so why InfoSec? Because we all know we want to do it. Why do we want to do it? So, supposedly, there's going to be 6 million InfoSec jobs in 2019. We're going to talk about the source of this coming from here in a second. Right? So, in 4 years, and this is worldwide, this is not just the United States, right? 6 million InfoSec jobs. Of the 6 million, 5 million personnel shortage, supposedly, right? The industry is growing at 36.5%, and the average salary of a security software engineer is $233,000. Okay, how many of you guys think those numbers are super high and totally inaccurate?
Me, I do as well. Look at the source, right? Oh, okay, hold on. I should have done this. This is the next slide. Let's put this a little bit in perspective. We're gonna look at, this is the number of registered nurses. This is coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Registered nurse is it's very high in demand, as well as Infosec, right? So there are currently about 2.7 million registered nurses in the United States. The industry is growing at 19%, and the average salary is $65,000, right? That's coming straight from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, right? So let's take a look at these numbers again. Look at that source right there. Can anybody see that? I know it's super tiny. It says CSO Online. Who knows what CSO does? CSO Online does? So, say what? Accepts money, exactly. They are a for-profit information security publication, and so it is totally in their favor. They publish these numbers, and it's in their favor to publish skewed numbers like these, right? So you're going to hear a lot. If you're just getting into Infosec, you're going to hear a ton. You're going to hear huge, ridiculous numbers like these all the time. While some of them may be accurate, more accurate than others, don't necessarily fall for that. However, let's look at the real numbers. Statistics. Anyway, so we're going to look at the real numbers: registered nurse versus an Infosec analyst. The registered nurse numbers are in blue. Infosec analyst numbers are in red. Number of positions open, there are 2.7 million registered nurses and 75,000 Infosec analysts, right? This is just security analysts. This was the only security-related position I could find on the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, right? And it's very possible that they could be lumping a whole lot more than just analysts into this. The industry growth rate is 37%. So that was actually fairly accurate coming from CSO Online. That is huge. The national average is, I'm sorry, I couldn't cite the exact national average, but I know it's less than half of that, right? The industry growth rate of 19% for registered nurses is above the national average, right? So that is a huge, huge growth rate right there. The average salary for an Infosec analyst is more like $86,000, not $233,000. However, it's definitely possible, depending on where you live, to be getting to make that much in Infosec. It's definitely not unheard of, right? So, not only that, we don't do it for the money, we don't do it for the numbers, we do it because it's freaking awesome, right? We think Infosec's awesome. Okay, everybody's hands should be up, or else they shouldn't be here. Just kidding. Okay, so we're going to go over a few things on steps that you can take. If you're just looking to get into Infosec, I've actually only been in the industry, I've been in the IT industry for about 3 years. I've only been in the Infosec industry for just over a year, right? And some of this advice I'm going to give is from my own experience, some of it is from my experience with others. The first thing that I want to address is get informed, right? There are a ton of different sources online that you can use to become more informed about what's going on in the Infosec world. How many of you guys are Reddit fans? How many of you guys spend all day on Reddit? I know there's a couple of you guys out there. Right? Those on Reddit, do you guys check out rnetsec? You should definitely check out rnetsec. There's a lot of other Infosec subreddits out there, but a lot of people will do research and then write it up in a blog or a white paper or whatever, and then post that on rnetsec. It is one of the most, how do I put this? It continuously has great data, great sources, and the great thing is that it's community driven. People are submitting the links themselves. If you're not on Reddit, you should be. How many of you guys are on Twitter? Yeah? How many of you guys look at the different Infosec professionals on Twitter and whatnot? Twitter is amazingly huge in the Infosec community. Everybody who's doing research, big name professionals, they're on there. If literally, my main news source for Infosec is Twitter. I also have a ton of RSS feeds that we're going to be touching on here in a second, but Twitter has become my main source of Infosec news just because so many people are tweeting about this stuff, right? Not only that, Twitter is a great place to network, right? Meet people that are doing the same type of thing that you're doing, working on the same projects. Meet up with them, DM them on Twitter, collaborate, build something together. Some of the from networking on Twitter, the job that I just accepted came from networking on Twitter. It genuinely did. RSS feeds. It seems like everybody these days has a security blog. I'm going to go over my favorites here in a second. But subscribe to blogs. I mean, even if you're not reading everything in the blog, every single blog post or every article or whatever it is, just so you could get an idea of what's going on via the headlines. Literally, like I have probably 30 RSS feeds in my Feedly account, and every morning I just go through the headlines, right? And I'll read the ones that really interest me, but just going through the headlines and then through my Twitter feed and then through our NetSec, excuse me, I usually have a fairly good idea and knowing of what's going on in information security, right? So that's a screenshot of the RNetSec Reddit. You can see there's a ton. The top one right there, attacking Ruby on Rails applications, that somebody probably wrote a white paper and you could go and look at it and do it yourself, right? That's one thing that I love about the InfoSec community, is that it's so open. Very, very open, and people are constantly publishing what they're doing, what they're working on, and you could go and mimic them, right? And learn from what they've already done. This is a good friend of mine's blog, Null Secure. He's constantly writing applications and publishing them onto his blog. He gets a lot of attention for it. That's Wired's feed, Wired's threat level and security. RSS feed is great. I like Wired because they tend to keep things accurate, and I mean, every publication tends to skew some things, but in my mind, they do a fairly good job. Krebs on security. He's kind of you either love him or hate him in the InfoSec community, right? Whether you love him or you hate him, I don't think there's any denying that he's a really great journalist, and he does some really, really, really great investigative work, and often will break stories before anybody else does. He actually just did an AMA, an Ask Me Anything, on Reddit just a couple days ago, and in that AMA he talked about how he specifically looks for stories that he knows no one else has a lead on yet. And that's just so that he has an up on it in his journalism, right? But it also makes his reads very, very interesting, right? Adobe had a huge breach, the Photoshop breach a year or two back, right? And he was the first one that broke it. He was the first one to know about it. Stuff like that. He just wrote a book, Spam Nation. Pretty good book. This is one of my favorites, Malware Must Die. This is a super technical blog, and what they do is they have a ton of honeypots all over the internet, and they get attacked all day long. And what they do is they reverse engineer the malware that they see on there, right? And they, as far as threat intelligence goes, these guys are actually pretty solid. They know what they're talking about. They know. English is their second language. Sometimes it's a little difficult to understand but they are. I've hit these guys up on Twitter several times, asking questions. Super great guys, willing to help out if you don't understand. I would definitely, if you're looking into getting into malware analysis, I would check out that blog for sure. Imperial Violet is also one of my favorites. Also a little more technical. Adam Langley, this is his blog. He works for Google. And in the screenshot that I have here is he's going in. So Chrome has recently, Google has recently ditched OpenSSL completely, and they use Boring SSL, which is their fork of OpenSSL, right? And in here he technically explains why Google made the decision to do that, right? When Poodle hit, he went into a very technical analysis of the Poodle, of the Poodle vulnerability, and explained exactly why it works, stuff like that. He doesn't post often, but when he does, it's really, really great stuff. ActiveResponse.org is one of my very favorites. This is a great one especially if you're going into analysis type work. This guy, I think he currently works for Microsoft doing threat intelligence for them, and he's been doing security analysis work for years, for decades, and he knows his stuff. He's also one that doesn't post super frequently. However, when he does, it's super great stuff. I always make sure I try and read his stuff. So those are just a few of my favorites. Podcasts. How many of you guys like to listen to podcasts on your way to work, or audiobooks, or whatever they may be? These are 3 podcasts that I would recommend, that maybe not necessarily listening to them every single week, right? But they're definitely great resources. How many of you guys have ever listened to Security Weekly? Yeah, formerly Paul.com. They got sued over that, so they had to change it to Security Weekly. What these guys do is they usually put out 2 shows a week, and in one show they interview a security professional, a security expert, in which that expert talks about the research that they're doing, what they're trying to accomplish in their field, whatnot. A lot of those interviews are super interesting. Once they had on I'm blanking on her name, but once they had a girl that was really, really good at host forensics, specifically on Mac, and that was one of my favorite talks, one of my favorite interviews that they've done. How many of you guys have listened to Risky Business? It's 1 or 2 of you. This guy, he's a journalist from Australia, and what he does is he goes through the security stories that have broken in the past week, and he hashes them out and he informs you on what's going on. He also typically does have big names on there, such as Alex Stamos or Brad Arkin. Alex is the CSO for formerly Yahoo, now for Facebook. Brad Arkin is the CSO for Adobe. Security Weekly, the second show that they put out that I mentioned, they also go through the stories together of the InfoSec news that has broken through the week. And these are seriously only an hour or so long. Super easy to give a listen on your way into work, to and from work, right? Or while you're mowing the lawn. That's what I do, right? There's also a lot of really good audiobooks out there that I would recommend. How many of you guys have listened to the Internet Storm Center's Daily Stormcast? This one is really good for those that are constantly involved in active threats. I've never seen this podcast go over 10 minutes long, and it's usually about 5 minutes. And what it is every weekday, the SANS Institute, they release this a podcast explaining new potential threats and vulnerabilities that broke the day before, right? So this is a really good one. It takes 5 minutes, gets you updated on what's going on in the InfoSec world. Any questions so far? Nope. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about education. As I said, this is a semi-controversial topic. How many of you guys have ever felt like this, like Willy Wonka here in this meme? Not hearing any laughs. I'm actually really surprised. Okay. So you claim to be an expert on shell shock. Who knows what shell shock is? Yeah? For those of you who don't know what shell shock was a major vulnerability that was exposed in the bash shell in Linux, right? And it's huge. It allowed for remote code execution, and I can't remember the percentage number, but an insane percent of the internet was completely vulnerable to it. And the crazy thing about shell shock is that it's not like if you're vulnerable to it, maybe it'll work, like some of these vulnerabilities and exploits are. If you're vulnerable to shell shock, it will work, right? And a lot of people, when this hit, everybody all the bad guys were trying to use it to spread worms, viruses, everything. Like everybody was getting hammered, right? And it's HR. Yeah, that's why I'm getting my CISSP, right? The CISSP is a great cert. You learn a lot of stuff, right? But just because you have it doesn't mean that you are a security expert. The ISC, the certifying body of the CISSP, has done a really good marketing job. So, which has resulted in the fact that HR, that's pretty much the premier certification that they look for in InfoSec professionals, and it kind of gets your foot in the door with HR. That's why I asked that. Not dissing the cert at all. It's a great certification. You learn a lot, right? So certifications can definitely help you if you're trying to get your foot in the door. That's why I'm talking about them here. CompTIA Security Plus. If you have no experience in security, that is a great security certification if you're looking for an entry-level job. I would highly recommend it. I think Professor Messer, if you Google him or look him up on YouTube, he has a free course that you could take to get ready for your Security Plus. Great entry-level cert, right? From there, you could this cert that is referencing here in this meme is the Microsoft Security Cert. If you're looking to get your foot in the door and looking for an entry-level job with Microsoft Security, also great cert, right? Yeah. Any questions about certifications? Okay. School. So we had a couple students in here. It's a great way to also get your foot in the door. School. So I have a degree in IT. And actually, before I started my degree in IT, I had no experience in IT other than what I dinked around with at home, right? My degree helped me greatly get an entry-level position. I got an entry-level position just a couple months after I even started the program, right? So that's a really good example of how school can get you in. Also, the job that I just accepted, they would not have hired me had I not had a degree, right? Degrees are super important. However, also that being said, I work with a couple of guys who do not have degrees, and they are two of the smartest guys that I know, right? And also two of the best InfoSec professionals that I've worked with, right? So while very important, not absolutely necessary, but if you don't have experience or you're looking to expand your horizon and your knowledge, definitely a good option for sure. And as that, we were talking about how the industry is growing at a rate of 37%. That's crazy, right? There's not going to be enough guys that have enough experience to get by without a degree, right? With the industry growing that fast, right? So education in information security is going to be ever increasingly important. BYU and the U have a graduate program in information security. UVU has a graduate certification, certificate in information security. They're working on making full-blown masters. There's also great programs all around the country. C has a great one. Carnegie Mellon. I have a coworker who's working on his PhD at Johns Hopkins in information security, right? I'm going to share a couple experiences that you'll see that I specifically put make friends with your professors. That doesn't mean brown nose your professors, but making friends with your professors will pay off. The current job that I have, I got because I impressed my professor, who is now my boss, right? Before that, I was offered a job from another professor. Didn't end up taking that one, but she was also impressed and offered me a job. I say that because it's a good example of how these educational programs can help you with networking and help you get your foot in the door, help you get a career. The current job that I have, I've learned a ton. I work with an awesome team. I'm an analyst, right? So I'm constantly looking at attacks coming into our infrastructure, and it's a blast, right? And I never would be able to do that if I hadn't had a good relationship with my professor and worked hard in my classes, right? So again, just because you have a PhD, though, doesn't mean that you can tout that you're an expert at something. Anyway, conferences. Yes?
Southern Utah University will have a master's in cybersecurity coming up this fall with next fall.
Awesome. Thank you. Are you affiliated with them? Awesome. I did not know that. Thank you so much. So not this fall, but next fall, 2016? Is it a full-blown master's? That's awesome. That's awesome to hear. Yeah, so Southern Utah University apparently will have a full-blown master's program in information security. All these are great schools. They really are. Have great programs, right? Conferences. How many of you guys recognize any of these logos here? A few of you. How many of you guys have been to DEF CON? I haven't been to DEF CON, actually. I should put my hand down. Black Hat. How many of you guys have been to any B-sides? Whether it's SLC, DC, Las Vegas, whatever. We're here at St. Con. There's tons of conference. I have an RSS feed in my Feedly that constantly publishes all the dates for conferences, and it amazes me how many conferences pop up every day, right? Some really popular ones besides DEF CON and Black Hat are ShmooCon, GrrCon. I had a coworker that went to ArchCon in St. Louis recently. They're all over the place. The great thing about my favorite personally are the B-sides ones. The great thing about B-sides is they're typically either free or super cheap, right? And they often will run like student discounts, right? And so they're easy to get into. The content is great. I had a blast at B-sides SLC. The content was super great. You learn a lot, right? There's tons of different conferences. It's more than likely if you're interested in security and you're an IT guy. I shouldn't say just an IT guy. I apologize. If you're an IT guy looking to get into information security and your employer's on board, it's very likely that they will pay for a security conference, right? And worst they could tell you is no. So definitely worth a try. Security conferences are great, especially the bigger ones where professionals that are doing big time research, huge research, making new discoveries will present their ideas there. There's also a lot of free training online. There is, here are a couple of examples. How many of you guys have ever used opensecuritytraining.info? It's not super popular, but it is free. And they have literally taken the time to record courses on various information security trainings, right? I was looking at one the other day that I have a particular interest in malware analysis, right? And I was looking at one, and they do have a couple courses in malware analysis, right? Another one is OpenNSM. NSM stands for Network Security Monitoring, and they have been working super hard lately to publish YouTube videos and trainings for network security monitoring software solutions, such as Suricata and Snort and Bro and Elk Stack, stuff like this, stuff that you can use to set up an IDS. They saw a need that there wasn't a ton of free training out there. I mean, there's a lot of training. You could go and get a degree. You could go get SANS training, but we all know SANS training is super expensive, right? You do all these different things, but there was a huge shortage of free, open, available sources for network security monitoring out there. And they've been working almost this whole year of 2015 to bring these to you. So if you Google OpenNSM, or their website is open-nsm networksecuritymonitoring.net, you could find links to their YouTube page, and these are great. Their Bro content is especially particularly good, and Bro is one of my very favorite tools that I use at work every single day. Any questions on that? I'm sure there's a lot more other free resources and free training online. Those are just the two that I have experience with, right? Also, I didn't put a slide in this here, but there are tons of books out there too. No Starch Books, O'Reilly. I'm blanking on other publishers here. Pact Publishing. There's a ton of tech publishers out there that release really great content in their books, and I have had a lot of value in just in going through those books, doing the labs. I'm going to talk about 2 specifically here coming up. Doing the labs in the books on my own, I've learned a ton. And my employer is usually willing to dish out the money for the book because it's usually only like 20 bucks, right? And even if I had to dish it out myself, I'd be willing to, because 20, 30, 40 bucks, it's not that much, right? Definitely worth the content that I'm going to get out of that. Okay, so this talk was largely inspired by a talk given by Rob Jorgensen. I don't know if you guys know Rob. He gave a talk at B-Sides called "Infosec Just Doing It," and I will fully admit I'm totally copying him in this talk. But he inspired me, and I wanted to do the same type of thing here because last year when I was at St. Con, I saw the need. I saw there was a lot of IT guys trying to get into security. I saw a good chunk of college students, a good chunk of high school students, and I wish I had a little bit more guidance when I was first looking into Infosec and whatnot. So my last point that I want to make is just do it, right? Just like Nike says, make it a hobby. One of my favorite sayings is, there's time for everything if you make it. I tried to look for a source on that, couldn't find it. A friend told it to me one time, and I struggle to believe that. How many of us just spend most of our free time looking at stuff on the internet? Like, that's what everyone does in 2015, right? So why don't we take that time that we spend looking at stuff on the internet, and we learn how to deploy an IDS, or we deploy a honeypot, or we read a book, or we do something that will advance our information security career. That's one thing that I've personally taken on, and that's one thing that I love about this industry, is that not only is it my job, but it's my hobby, because I love it that much. Stay up. I'm a bad example at this, but this is how I make time for stuff. I'm married with 2 kids, and so I'm at work all day, and then I get home, and I spend a couple hours with my girls before they go down, and then I spend a couple hours with my wife, and then usually about 11 o'clock or midnight, I stay up for like 3 or 4 or 5, 6 hours doing stuff that I want to do, I'm a honeypot addict. I have a lot of honeypots out on the internet collecting different malware and stuff like that. I'm also recently been engaged in a lot of other projects that I dealing with malware and open source intelligence and stuff like that. And yeah, I pull a lot of all-nighters. So that's how I personally make time for my favorite hobby. And I do that fairly often. I average probably about like 5 hours of sleep. It's terrible. So, how many of you guys know, or at least are familiar with Python, the programming language Python? If you're not, learn it. You will use it every single day in your InfoSec career. And even if you're not looking to get into InfoSec and you're in IT or computer science or whatever it may be, I use this all the time when I was in IT too, right? You will use it all the time. Python is great. These are the 2 books that I use. These aren't the only books that I've used, but these, if you're looking for InfoSec specific Python, these are 2 great books. They're by the same guy, Justin Seitz. I'm sorry if I totally butchered that last name. But Black Hat Python and Gray Hat Python. Black Hat Python is more geared towards pen testers. Gray Hat Python is geared more towards malware analysts, right? But despite whatever you're going to do in InfoSec, you will benefit. Another really good one that I also really like is Violent Python by TJ O'Connor, I think that's the author. It's a little more dated, but the principles are still the same. The stuff that he teaches in that book is awesome. Definitely stuff that I'd recommend. Any questions on Python or anything that I've gone over so far? Okay, so this is the idea that I mostly wanted to convey. I've been in several job interviews where I've been the one interviewing rather than being the one being interviewed, and I've interviewed candidates that you could tell are really passionate about InfoSec, and you could tell, and then there are also candidates that are kind of more see it as a job, and the difference is very blatant. And we tend to hire the ones that are a lot more passionate about it. The ones that are passionate about it are the ones that just go out there and they do it. They see something they want to do and they do it, right? They see something on Twitter, they see something on Reddit, they see something somewhere online, they talk to a friend that did something and they're like, that is super cool, how did you do it? Or they find this blog, they walk them through it step by step, they go and do it. Like the people that take that personal initiative will get hired over the people that don't every single time. They really will. It just shows that they're willing to learn. They're willing to work for what they want, and it shows a spectacular initiative, right? So here are a couple ideas. As I said, I'm a honeypot addict. It's really, really easy to deploy a honeypot out there on the internet and look at all the traffic coming in, the different types of attacks, look at the different malware, stuff like that. I gave a talk at B-Side Salt Lake City in March, and I talked all about honeypots. I was going to give another talk here at St. Con about my honeypots as well, but I had to scratch that one. I apologize for any of you that were wanting to go to it. Set up a home IDS. This is super easy. How many of you guys have heard of Security Onion? Security Onion is a great distro to get started with if you're interested in network security monitoring. What it is it's based off of Ubuntu 12.04. They're working on upgrading it to 14.04 just before 16.04 comes out, but that's okay. And what it is it has a ton of open source network security monitoring tools in it. It has Bro, Snort, Snorby, ElkStack, ELSA. It's got a full packet capture solution, which I'm blanking on the name. Anyway, and you could use all of these. You just got to set up a network tab. You could buy a Throwing Star network tab online for $20, right? You throw it in, you tap your network, you throw the tap to your box that's running Security Onion, and it's picking up all your traffic, right? And you can look and see what kind of alerts your IDS is throwing. Yes, in the back. So I've always just used a Throwing Star network tab. Let's see if I can find one here actually. This guy right here. It comes in the mail just like this, and you assemble it yourself, and it's passive. So you have to have a box with 2 NICs, right? So what I've done is I have a Raspberry Pi and I just bought a USB NIC for it too, and one's picking the inbound and one's picking up the outbound. There's another one, they call this one the Pro, and I literally think the only difference is that it's enclosed. And they charge like $20 more for it. So yeah, these are great, especially if you're working on a budget. I mean, when you're doing individual research, everybody's on a budget, right? So, but if you have money and you can buy a smart switch that will do a span port, definitely do it, right? But that's my suggestion for you. Does that answer your question? No problem. Any other questions? That was a great question. Feel free to answer any questions. I tend to go off and stuff. Set up a vulnerable web app and break it. Don't break a vulnerable web app that's actually on the internet, because that's illegal, right? Set up your own vulnerable web app and bust it. Do some pen testing, or maybe not even a web application. Set up a Windows XP box, because we all know Windows XP has tons of vulnerabilities, and use Metasploit. Metasploit is a pen testing framework. Go look it up if you're not familiar with it. It's amazing. Use Metasploit to hack at it, to break it, right? There's a new distro that just came out. I believe it's called Extreme Vulnerable Linux. That has a ton of vulnerable web applications. There's another one that's also been very popular called Damn Vulnerable Web Application. There's a handful of them out there. There's a ton, right? So set them up and do what you're supposed to do with them. Break them, right? You will learn a ton. Participate in CTFs and bug bounties. CTF stands for Capture the Flag. The Hackers Challenge here at St. Con is an example of what I call a CTF, right? What everybody calls a CTF. that's actually my very favorite thing about conferences is their CTFs, because I learn way more doing hands-on stuff like that than I do sitting and listening to talks. Not that the talks aren't valuable, right? But I personally am a more hands-on learner. A lot of companies, who knows what a bug bounty program is? Yeah, bug bounty, for those of you who don't know, but a lot of companies will have what's called a bug bounty program, where basically they'll pay you if you find a vulnerability in their software or their website or their portal or whatever it may be, right? And they do that to help strengthen and make their websites less vulnerable, right? If you participate in these things or in CTFs, you will learn. There's always a lot of the conferences that are going on, that do CTFs. You don't necessarily have to be a participant at the conference, an attendant at the conference to participate in the CTF. I believe it for SaintCon that is the case. However, there are tons of conferences all over the United States, all over the world, that they let anyone participate in the CTF during the conference, right? Sometimes those are fun to just get a bunch of buddies on the weekend that they're going on and try and figure it out yourself, right? Write different applications. Been done before, you're probably going to learn a heck of a lot doing it anyway, right? So play around with tools on Kali Linux, Wi-Fi Pineapple, Rubber Ducky. How many of you guys have ever heard of these solutions? Kali Linux is a pen testing distribution of Linux. Wi-Fi Pineapple, you can do a bunch of man-in-the-middle attacks with Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi pineapples can tend to be fairly expensive, so actually what I do is I have a Raspberry Pi, and there's a distribution that goes on the Raspberry Pi. Freak, and I'm blanking on the name here. If anybody knows it, shout it out. But it does the exact same thing as Wi-Fi Pineapple. I want to say it might be Fruity Pie or something like that. Anyway, Rubber Ducky is, it's a USB drive that it looks like a USB drive, but really when you plug it in, it's recognized by the computer as a keyboard, and you could then execute code and whatnot, and get sensitive information from people's computers. If you see something that you think is awesome, I think I've said this like 5 times now, if you see something that interests you, if you see something that you don't quite understand, just go do it. One thing that when I was first getting into IT, Linux, I had like absolutely no experience in Linux. So what I did was I took my home laptop, I wiped it, I threw Ubuntu on it, and I forced myself to use the command line for everything, right? That's not necessarily specific to Infosec, but it's a good example of if you want to learn something, go and do it until you understand it, right? If you see something online that somebody did that is super cool, go and do it. If you want, sometimes it's human nature, and I am definitely guilty of this. It's human nature to sometimes feel threatened by what other people are doing if they're making advances in Infosec, or maybe like you had an idea, but then somebody kind of already took it, right? For instance, I was trying to develop a honeypot, and in the middle of the development of it, I found out that somebody had actually already developed my exact same idea, right? My plan, I have not done it yet, so maybe a bad example, but my plan is to reach out to that developer and work with him to make it better, right? I don't want to let that impede me from still being able to learn what I was going to learn by doing what I wanted to do, right? So don't feel threatened by other professionals, don't feel threatened by coworkers. One thing that is awesome about Infosec is that we're all a community, right? And we can learn from each other's mistakes and each other's knowledge. That makes sense? Any questions? This is the last slide, so if you have any questions, right? I'll be around the con. Feel free to come up, ask me any questions. I blog at dodgesec.com. I'm ETH0 on Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me via email, Twitter. I usually respond. So thank you so much for your time, guys.